Good afternoon again. We are delighted to be joined by our good friends from DESA, who are here to present the World Population Prospects 2024 Summary of Results. We will start by hearing from Navid Hanif, the Assistant Secretary General in DESA, and then followed by John Wilmoth and Clare Menozzi. Navid, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Stefan, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. Today is the World Population Day. And this year, the theme for commemorating this day is embracing the power of inclusive data towards a resilient and equitable future for all. Today, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, or UNDESA, is releasing a new report, World Population Prospects 2024 Summary of Results. This is the report we are launching today. The report is based on our latest data, World Population Prospects 2024, the 28th edition of the United Nations Estimates and Projections of Population at the global, regional, and national levels. This data set and report have been among the most referenced or downloaded products of UNDESA over many years. Members of the media, the report comes at a time when the demographic landscape of many countries is changing rapidly, sometimes creating anxiety and sometimes confusion. Due to rapid declines in fertility levels in some of the world's most populous countries, the size of the global population is likely to peak in the mid-2080s, from 8.2 billion people in 2024, which is this year, to around 10.3 billion in the mid-2080s, and then will return to around 10.2 billion by the end of the century. The size of the world's population in 2100 is now expected to be 6% lower, or around 700 million lower than anticipated a decade ago. This represents a major shift compared to a decade ago, with important policy implications for the sustainability of our planet. For instance, rapid growth in some contexts likely to magnify the scale of investments and efforts required to eradicate poverty and hunger and malnutrition and ensure universal access to healthcare, education, and other essential services in countries that are already facing severe economic, social, and environmental impediments. Conversely, rapid population decline in other contexts may require innovative policy responses to address potential macroeconomic, labor market, social protection, and national security ramifications. One way to address these challenges is to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. This can help avoid the most extreme demographic outcomes, and let me explain with two examples very quickly. First, facilitating a shift towards smaller families in populations that are growing rapidly, and where individuals and couples often have more children than they desire. In countries with rapid population growth, for instance, investing in the education of young people, especially girls, and increasing the age at marriage and first childbearing will have positive repercussions for women's health, educational attainment, and labor force participation. Second, enabling parents to have larger families if they so desire in populations that are declining and where people often fail to achieve their desired family size. In countries where fertility is low, providing parental leave, flexible work arrangements, affordable child care, and care for older persons, and promoting equal household responsibility can boost female labor participation, support families, encourage childbearing, and enhance economic security for all. These are just two examples of important insights into the relationship between population and sustainable development, which can help decision making in many countries. Such insights are product of research which requires reliable data, such as those provided in the World Population Prospects dataset. Data from the prospects have been widely used to compute national level indicators as part of the global monitoring progress towards the SDGs. Let me conclude by thanking my colleague, Mr. John Wilmoth, Director of UNDESA's Population Division, and his team for their unwavering commitment and professional excellence in maintaining this high-quality data and analytical product for ensuring the continuing relevance of the World Population Prospects, which is one of UNDESA's flagship projects. Thank you.
Thank you. John, please.
Thank you, Stefan. Good afternoon, everyone. Production of the World Population Prospects is the largest recurrent project of the Population Division. The 2024 edition being launched today offers a comprehensive set of demographic data to assess population trends at the global, regional, and national levels. It is based on data from more than 1,900 national population censuses, almost 3,200 sample surveys, and information from civil registration and vital statistics systems for 129 countries. There's inherent uncertainty in population estimates and even more so in population projections. Projection uncertainty around trends in population size is a function of the uncertainty in projected trajectories of the three components of population change, namely fertility, mortality, and international migration. And these have been assessed for each country and area using methods of demographic and statistical analysis. An assessment of this uncertainty is included in our analyses in the form of prediction intervals, which represent a plausible range for future trajectories of population size and other demographic indicators. Unsurprisingly, projection uncertainty grows larger the farther we peer into the future. For the first time, the 2024 edition of the World Population Prospects includes an assessment of the uncertainty around future trajectories of international migration. Uncertainty related to future trends in fertility has been part of the analysis ever since 2013, and for mortality since 2015. For most countries, the additional uncertainty in population trends that is attributable to future levels of international migration is relatively small, since population change due to international migration is typically much smaller than population change related to the balance between births and deaths. For some countries, however, the inclusion of uncertainty attributable to migration in the projection model leads to a substantial increase in the uncertainty of future population trends. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn to some of our key findings. Over the next 50 or 60 years, the world's population is expected to grow, reaching a peak of around 10.3 billion people in the mid-2080s, up from 8.2 billion in 2024. After achieving its peak size, the global population is projected to start declining gradually, returning to around 10.2 billion people by the end of the century. According to this latest assessment, the chance that the world's population will peak within the current century is quite high, with a probability of about 80%. This is a major change compared to United Nations projections from a decade earlier, when the estimated probability that global population would reach a maximum, and thus that growth would come to an end during the 21st century, was around 30%. The earlier occurrence of a peak in the projected size of the global population is due to several factors, including lower than expected levels of fertility in recent years in some of the world's largest countries, especially China. However, the global trend hides a great diversity of situations around the world. Some countries still have high levels of fertility and are growing rapidly, while others have had historically low levels of fertility for several decades and are now experiencing a rapid aging of the population and in some cases decline. While these differences are striking, it's important to understand that all populations are following a similar path. The differences stem from countries being at different stages of the demographic transition towards longer lives and smaller families. 5 additional key findings that I wish to bring to your attention are: 1, women today bear 1 child fewer on average than they did in around 1990. That's globally. Number 2, following the COVID-19 pandemic, global life expectancy is rising once again. That's good news. By 2080, persons aged 65 or older will outnumber children under age 18. Number 4, for some populations, immigration will be the main driver of future growth. And 5, gender equality and women's empowerment can help to counter rapid population growth or decline, as Mr. Hanif was mentioning. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2024 edition of the World Population Prospects provides more detailed and in-depth data than ever before. In addition, there is greater transparency concerning the methods applied and improved access to the data used to generate and update the data set. In closing, I wish to thank and congratulate Mr. Patrick Gerland and all members of the WPP team for their work in preparing the 2024 edition of the World Population Prospects dataset. I would also like to thank Mr. Pablo Latis and colleagues for the IT support provided, Ms. Clare Menozzi and her team for drafting the summary report that we are launching today, this one you saw earlier, and Ms. Caroline Schmidt and her associates for their work in supporting this launch. I also wish to thank other colleagues in the Population Division who have contributed their time, skills, and expertise to this launch. Thanks to all of you for your attention.
Thank you, and I think Claire will now present the report, the summary of the report on screen. Please, thank you.
Thank you so much. So it's a great pleasure to show a few slides from the report, which are, I think, very interesting, and we hope you will enjoy it. So as we have heard, the world population is projected to continue to grow and to reach a peak of 10.3 billion by the mid-2080s. The line is the dark black line at the top. And after that, we are projecting that the global population will slowly start to decline, and by the end of the century, it should be around 10.2 billion. And what this is interesting because it signals that we have come to the end of a process of rapid growth on a global scale that began in the second half of the 20th century. As John mentioned, there is great diversity among countries. And so for 63 countries and areas, the size of their population has already peaked. These are the countries that are indicated in the graph in orange, and they represent approximately 28% of the current population of the world. In the second group of countries, 48 countries and areas, their population is still growing, and they are projected to peak in the next 30 years. The share of these countries in total population is around 10%, and they're represented by the green line in the graph. And the final group, which is the largest, is 126 countries and areas, representing 2/3 of the global population. And for these countries, we are projecting that the population will continue to grow through 2054 and will probably peak in the second half of the century or later. And the importance is that the trajectory that this last group of countries will take will probably determine or have a great impact on the trend at the global level in terms of when the population will peak and at the timing and the size. This is my last slide, and I wanted to draw your attention to where some of the countries fall in terms of this classification. So the table shows some of the countries with the largest populations. And so among the 63 countries and areas that have already peaked in size, we have China, Germany, Japan, and the Russian Federation, among others. Among the countries that are projected to peak in the next 30 years, this group includes Brazil, Iran, Turkey, and Vietnam. And in the last group, which is the largest, we have 126 countries and areas. Of these, a large number are projected to peak within the century, and this includes Bangladesh, France, India, Indonesia, and the United Kingdom, but also 73 countries and areas that are not projected to peak within the century, and this includes Nigeria, Pakistan, and the United States of America. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Very interesting. Edie.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. I have a question, but first I have a statistical question. In the report, you talk about countries and areas, and if you add up those three things, you have 63 and 48, which adds up to 111, and then you're talking about 126 other countries and areas, which adds up to 237. There are 193 countries in the United Nations. What are the rest of those places that you're talking about? And then I have a question.
That there are a number of territories. First of all, there's a list that's maintained by the Statistics Division of DESA, which is called the M49 list. It's been used for a long time as a way of breaking up the world's population into these almost 240 units. Those 237 units, as you mentioned, they together comprise the total population of the world. They include member states of the United Nations. In some cases, member states of the UN are broken into separate parts that are treated separately. For example, France, which has overseas territories, which are listed separately in the M49 list, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and so forth. And they're done that. It's done that way partly because if we want to study regional patterns, we need to separate Martinique from metropolitan France because it's in the Caribbean. So that's why that list exists, or that's one of the reasons that it exists. So it includes the 193 member states plus, of course, the observer states and a lot of territories.
Okay. Whoops. So my question is, the world population today is 8.2 billion. We're seeing what the world today is like. What do you envision the world at its peak with 10.3 billion population to look like and be different from what we are seeing now?
I'll take a stab at it, but I think nobody really knows. I think clearly what's the world going to be like in 60 years from now. In terms of the population and the significance of that, I think it's important to consider the impact of having a larger population. The population does continue to grow, so the impact that humans have on the environment and the world continues to increase just as a function of how many of us there are. But at the same time, one thing that we try to emphasize in this report is that human behaviors matter more than human numbers when it comes to the impact on the environment. And so, yes, we can talk about the change in the population over the next 60 years, but you ask me what the world is going to be like. I think it will depend on many things beyond the population trends. What the world is like in 60 years will depend on a lot of choices that will be made between now and then, policies that will be implemented or not, and technological advance and so forth. All of these things will change the world that we're living in. Population trends will be one part of that, but not necessarily the largest or the determining part. What really matters is our behaviors and the choices that we make.
Thank you, Yoshita.
Thank you. Yoshita Singh with Press Trust of India. I have a question about the population of India. It's the most populous country. Do you have any findings about till when that will continue? Any projections, trajectory of where India is headed, some challenges in its population? Can you share some findings on India specifically? Thank you.
So we have a very nice figure in our report on page, let me see, page numbers aren't complete, but it's figure 4.4, and it shows the ranking of the countries that are most populous, that have the largest number, in 3 points in time. So today, in 2054, and at the end of the century. And the ranking in terms of where India stands is currently the largest country in the world in terms of population, and it is projected to stay so throughout the century. The population is currently estimated at 1.45 billion. It's supposed to increase further. India is in the third group of countries that we discussed. It's supposed to increase further to 1.662 billion. It's supposed to peak around the 2060s in size, and then it starts to slightly decline. So by the end of the century, India is projected to be around 1.5 billion, but still the largest country in the world by a large margin.
Yes, in this, Shidaji with China Central Television. So in this report, one of the key findings is that, one of the key finding is by 2080, persons aged 65 or older will outnumber children under 18. I think that means an aging society, a global aging society, and that probably will happen even before this. So what would be the impact for this? And if we're talking about policy making, what would you recommend global, leaders, world leaders to deal with this? Thank you.
DESA has produced many publications on the challenge. First of all, let's not take aging as a curse. Aging is a success story. We are living longer and we want to live healthier. So first recommendation, it has fiscal challenges, labor market challenges, and health challenges. So we have been recommending to governments to look at all policy implications and start planning now. How will you handle with the aging population? So health facilities is topmost. It's not that you want to have longer lifespan. You want to have longer health span. That should be their primary consideration. Then look at the fiscal measure they need to take, because it's the pension, social security, all of these have implications. And thirdly, job markets. We need to think, and this is a recommendation we have made, every society has to make its own decision. You should keep them in the labor market for longer so that you have productive population to deal with the challenges that I've just mentioned. So multidimensional policy interventions are required to be prepared as a society for this group of people that we will be eventually dealing with.
Thank you, Abdul Hamid, then Ibtisam, and then Evelyn.
Thank you, Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic Daily, Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have few questions. Some of them maybe require a short answer. My first question about the ratio between male and female of the current 8.2 billion people. And second, when China stopped that policy of one child per family, how did that affect the outgrowing number of people in China? Did it show any effect? And third, during the pandemic, there was so many conspiracy theory about the 1 golden billion population and eliminating some part of the population, all kind of conspiracy theory. Do you have any comment on that? And finally, a question about Egypt. How I see it in the third category, that means it will continue to grow, and yet it's facing some difficulty, especially after building the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, and it might be a water-poor country in the future. So how is your reading for the future of Egypt? Thank you.
So the male-female ratio, You're asking just a general question?
Hold on, John. If you, there you go. Your mic's on. Go ahead. Start. No, start again.
The male-female ratio, I mean, there's a majority female in the world, but there's a majority male at birth. This is kind of a biological phenomenon that we have about 105 boy babies for every 100 girl babies, but then that changes over the life course because of higher mortality of men, so that at older ages you have a large majority female, and the overall effect is a majority female. But I'm not sure what your question is. I mean, that's just a general result that we observe kind of across almost all populations in the world, historically and today. As far as the one-child policy and the impact, fertility has continued to fall since 2016 when China retracted that policy. We don't know for sure what it would have done if they hadn't changed the policy, but we can say that the withdrawal of the policy did not arrest the downward trend of fertility in China, which has reached very low levels in recent years. I didn't understand your question about the pandemic. The concern about what was the question about the pandemic? I didn't.
I spoke about the conspiracy theory. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists spread out saying, oh, it is a policy to eliminate some of the population. We need to control the population growth. There was a Russian, Putin spoke about that the Western thinking of the 1 golden billion people only, so the rest, they don't matter. So if we don't have to worry about the growth in the developing nations. So that's the kind of conspiracy theory that came with the pandemic.
I really don't have any comment on the conspiracy theory.
No comment on theories. Let me come to your question on Egypt. It's very related to Edith's question. What we cannot predict the future. It's the most uncertain thing to predict. What we do is scenarios. If you go down the road, business as usual scenario, fossil fuel consumption, no respect of water resources, land resources, fiscal policies are irresponsible, debt burdens are growing. Business as usual scenario, if this kind of population growth, the future doesn't look promising. SDG scenario, if policies shift, commitments are reinforced, and we implement these commitments by 2030 or maybe a little later, the scenario changes. Countries will be on a better place in terms of both environmental resources, fighting hunger, fighting poverty, educating children, and giving women equal rights. We can do scenarios for each country and for the world, and we have done that a few years ago. The trajectories look very depressing if you continue business as usual. So our recommendation is change it. Thank you.
Ibtisam, Evelyn, Benno, and Al Jazeera Corner.
Hi, my name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have one question about two aspects. How much, when in your research and in your calculation, you put you take into consideration the issue of climate change and how you do it, and then also the issue of conflicts, specifically, let's say, the Middle East or Gaza. How much is this also part of the calculation that you do in your research and projections? Thank you. And how also? Thanks.
These are not easy questions. These are some of the most challenging parts of the work, I would say, we've been trying to figure out what to do about climate change. To some extent, it's already reflected in the projections that we make, in the sense that, climate change, in some ways, it's producing, for example, more extreme events. But there have always been extreme weather events that have had effects that have caused populations to be displaced and so forth. But climate change, of course, is increasing the intensity and the frequency of those, and we don't really have a good way of taking that into account, the increase of the frequency. But the fact that there are events that disrupt population trends that we've had in the past and that we'll have also in the future, I mean, our projections are based on looking at how the trends progressed in the past, and then imagining that if in the future, if they progressed in a similar way. But to the extent that climate change changes the way that future trends will go, we don't really have a way of taking that into account. And we've been discussing this with people. It's an active topic of scientific research in the academic community, and we're in contact with people who are interested in this. But I would say at this point, nobody really has the answer about how to incorporate concerns about climate change into our projections in a way that's fully believable. As far as conflicts, an important point is that for our estimates, we base them on official data, and so. For current conflicts that you mention, we don't have the final information from countries. So everything that we've included is, it's based on what we have in terms of official data, but then when we look forward into the future, we have to make assumptions. And I don't have the precise information on any of these specific examples that you mentioned, but if you'd like, we can come back to you if you're interested in the assumptions that we've made in any of those specific cases.
Evelyn, then Benno.
Thank you. Evelyn Leopold. Very interesting listening to this and reading about it earlier. What about birth control? Is there any discussion about that? Have you looked into that for when people are willing, or just the entire education on reproductive health? I mean, I was looking at your 123 nations. I'm not sure why France and Britain are on there, but certainly the United States is not a discussion we want to have today. But I just wonder of women willing, what's stopping them?
Thank you so much for the question. So I think in the report, we're trying to emphasize with these different groups that fertility levels are at very different levels in the world, right? And so in the first group of countries, we see that fertility levels are already very low, below what we call the replacement level of 2.1, which is the level that's required for a population to remain stable in size, assuming no migration. The low levels of fertility are also found in the second group of countries, the ones that are going to peak in the next 30 years. The third group of countries, the 126 countries and areas, has a mixture of different groups in there. It has countries that are growing extremely rapidly. In fact, we're projecting that for some of them, their populations will double in size in the next 30 years. And in many cases, this rapid growth is due to high levels of fertility. In some cases, above 4 live births per woman. But we also have in that group of countries, some countries that already have low levels of fertility. And the reason why they're growing is predominantly because of international migration. And in terms of the dimension that you had raised about family planning, I think we try to emphasize in the report that it's very important in context where women and couples would like to have fewer children than they're having, that they have access to the best quality care, services, and information so that they can achieve their desired family size.
Is there access?
Sorry?
You mentioned access. Is there access?
Access is, well, the data on contraceptive prevalence is very interesting, and we have some colleagues who are experts on that, and we can also put you in touch with them. But access has been improving in many parts of the world. There are gaps in unmet need that needs to be fulfilled. And one of the issues is the growth of the population in some of these countries means that there will be a large number of girls who will not have access. And one aspect that we pay particularly attention to in this report, although it is not the focus, is on adolescent births. So births to girls who are 18 and under, and including girls who are under 15. And we have a figure in here which is 340,000 births to girls under 15, which is obviously very worrisome and needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Benno Schwinghammer with the German Press Agency. I think I'm touching on questions that were kind of asked a little bit at least, and you touched on this with your answers, but I was asking myself, when you do scenarios that reach so much in the future, how much we can rely on that they actually are accurate when we reach the year 2084 or something. I think my question is, how big is the role of anticipating big world events? I mean, there is a certain chance that there will be a next pandemic in the next 50 years, I guess. There is a certain chance that there's a medical breakthrough in reversing age in human cells. Is there any way to factor these events in, or can you just say this is how the world would develop if nothing like this out of ordinary happens?
So we're not assuming that nothing out of the ordinary will happen or that there will be no breakthroughs. That's not the assumption. The assumption is that there will continue to be breakthroughs in medicine and in society and changes in society similar to what has happened in the past. So that we're kind of, what we assume is constant is the pattern of change. You know, so that change will continue as it has in the past. There will be changes, improvements, reductions in death rates and changes in behaviors leading to lower fertility rates in countries and possibly a rebound in fertility for countries that have very low levels. And this is all based on evidence of what has happened in the past for countries that have been through similar trajectories in the past. And so it's not an assumption of no further breakthroughs or no major events, but it's just an assumption that the major breakthroughs and events that will happen in the future are somehow similar to those that happened in the past and that the changes that they will bring will be similar.
Thank you, Bassam.
I have a specific question on the third column. You had Syria in that column, and given that it's a country that has been through conflict for, past many, many years, can you elaborate a little bit more how it's projected actually it was, I think, in the column where it was like an increase by 2054, if I'm not mistaken, and how did the conflict actually affect that, and is this reversing your projection?
So I don't have all the details for your question, so we'll have to follow up. But we have, and that also speaks to the earlier question about the probability. All of these, as we said, heard from Navid, to what we are talking about are projections, and there's a great deal of uncertainty. And the further ahead we go in time, the greater that uncertainty becomes. But for many countries, we are not only showing when the population is projected to peak, but also the probability that that will occur at that time. So for Syria, let me check. We are projecting as a medium scenario that it will peak in population in the 2080s, and this is fairly high, about 50%, and a 78% chance that it will have peaked by the end of the century.
Do you have any sort of explanation for the reasons and how, like, the conflict in Syria might have affected that or did not affect it, since it is actually projected to increase?
I am not able to answer that in great detail, so we can follow up on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Thanks a lot for the briefing. I'm not a math person, so I'll preface my comment with that. Right? We're journalists, right? Just 3 questions of clarification so I make sure I understand the numbers, right? I'll do them one at a time because I think they're easy answers for you. On page 2, you say, in 2024, 4.7 million babies, or about 3.5% of the total worldwide, were born to mothers under 18. But we're in 2024, so is that a projection? It is. Okay, thank you. And then on page 5, you talk about immigration. Very interesting statistics, but in the 3rd bullet point, you say growth in 52 countries. Where in the I couldn't find, what page do I find those 52 countries?
So the specific list of those countries is not in a specific part. It's throughout the different chapters and the different groups,
okay.
And they fall quite homogeneously across the different groups. Actually, the countries where international migration is going to be the main driver of growth, and in some cases, the main reason for slowing their decline. So depending on how that is, what their trajectory is, that's why we also didn't describe the exact 52. But some of them, for example, many of the high incomes that are in the first group would fall into that category. Many of the high income countries in the third group as well, and so forth. So they're across all three, and they have different impacts. But in all cases, they're either contributing to increasing population growth or they're contributing to slowing population decline.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Just one last clarification. That's on page 43. I just want to make sure I'm reading the graph on page 43 correctly. You're projecting that China's population...
The number of the graph, please, because the page numbers, I think, are afraid are not.
It's IV.4. Yeah. It's the projections of world populations. You see it? My only question is, am I reading it correctly that you have China's population in 2100 being... You project China's population to be 633 million, half of what it is today. I'm reading that correctly, right? Okay, thank you. And then I just also want to know, am I reading it correctly that in 2100 you project the 5th most populous country in the world to be the DRC? Okay, thank you.
Got that out of the way. Edie.
I was going to ask about China too, but Gabriel didn't quite ask my question. Why is there going to be such a precipitous drop that you're going to half China's population?
It relates to the level of fertility that's observed currently in China. The current number, I believe, is right around 1 birth per woman on average over a lifetime. So, I mean, given that you need 2.1 births to maintain the current population without migration, if fertility levels remain at such a low level, even if they come up slightly, any fertility level that's below 2, or especially below 1.8 or below 1.5, you're really getting into low levels of fertility, and it produces a long-run decline that's quite significant. And that's true for China. It's true for some other countries in this analysis.
Great. Thank you. On that note, thank you all for coming to presenting this report, which is always interesting. And we'll see you before next year.